60 and 50 years later, that's Hurricane Katrina. That is just one example of how far we've come in one generation of weather prediction. So you can make fun of our technology, you can make fun of us, and yes, we still get paid if we're wrong, blah, 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 right? But it has come a long way, which is super cool. All right, anybody from PA? Anybody from Pennsylvania? Yeah. Oh, cool. Where are you from?
From Philly.
Where?
Oh, Allentown, actually.
Cool. I was in Doylestown. Anybody else from Philly side? No. Pittsburgh side? I'm sorry, that's okay. Yeah, way colder and cloudier. You're exactly right. So I grew up skiing a little mountain on the East Coast called Shawnee Mountain. 700 vertical feet of pure fun. I don't think I had a powder day until I don't think I skied powder for 16 years after starting skiing. I started skiing at 4, and I had my first powder day at Tussey Mountain near Penn State when it unexpectedly snowed about 2 feet during President's Day in 2003. So I did not grow up skiing powder, but had found it, and it is amazing. So I came to grad school here at CU. Anybody go to CU? Half of you or more? Great. So I was at it, by the way, if I went to CU instead of Penn State, I likely would have failed out after discovering powder. I don't know how you people graduated from CU. It's just unbelievable. But after I went to CU, I got a job, and I started to miss powder days, and I was sitting in an office instead of skiing powder, and I get really, really mad at that because that is no fun. So I decided, well, somebody should forecast these powder days better than they're currently being forecast, and so I tried to figure it out. And I started an email list 7 years ago. Holy crap, it's a long time. With 28 friends, and said, here's where we should ski this weekend. And then it morphed into a couple hundred people. I started a blog, which is Colorado Powder Forecast. Anybody remember that? Yeah. That was fun. I heard it used to snow a lot more back when it was Colorado Powder Forecast. I've been told I should just rename the website back to that. But I did that for a couple years. I quit my job because, hey, that's what you do in your late 20s and pursue your dream. And I did, and ate ramen a lot, but things worked out. And the last year on OpenSnow, we had about 1.25 million people, not just on our Colorado, but OpenSnow nationwide. So that's mostly because of you guys telling people on chairlifts, even if they didn't want to hear it. So thank you very much. Also, big shout out to my father, who probably told half of those people we should go to OpenSnow. Anyway, so thank you very much. I'm literally living my dream from childhood, forecasting snow. Okay, enough about me. If you want great snow, you probably all know about this. I write the Colorado Daily Snow every morning. Check that out. We do inch-by-inch snow forecasts. And the number one question, though, that I get every year at this time, and pretty much any time, is, what's the season going to be like? Right? So I want to talk about that a little bit, and then talk about the next 10 or 15 days and see what's going on. So, one, anybody who's been reading the forecasts that I've written for more than about a week knows that I hate long-term forecasts. One, because they're relatively incorrect, and two, because they don't give you any details, right? Even if they say average, below average, above average season, they don't tell you exactly when to enjoy the best snow. So I don't find them all that useful, but they're fun to look at. So we can look for a few clues about what's going to happen this season. The first thing we'll look at is El Nino and La Nina. Does anybody know what El Nino means?
The boy.
No. Close though. What does it mean?
It's Spanish for the Nino.
Thank you very much. You were too correct. I'm sorry. I was looking for the odd answer. It is Spanish for the Nino. Thank you, Chris Farley. So El Nino describes water temperatures in the Central Pacific. You can barely see this. That is generally south of Hawaii and west of Chile over into the Central Pacific Ocean. Water temperatures there basically drive weather patterns around the world. That's why we care. That's why we care about water temperatures 5,000 miles away from here, because they change weather patterns. So during a La Nina year, meaning we have colder than average water temperatures, we generally get a storm track from the northwest. That is pretty darn good for the mountains accessible close to Boulder. Rocky Mountain National Park, Eldora, the I-70 mountains, not as good for the southern Colorado. During an El Nino, we actually get storm tracks that come up from the southwest. Generally better for southern Colorado, not as good for us. So what's this year? Well, this is a graph of water temperatures over about the past year, and most recently they are above average. So this year is an El Nino. It's probably a weak to moderate El Nino, which means, on average, southern Colorado looks pretty good. Of course, I said on average.
So good! Tell you right!
Thank you very much. Perfect. That's the end of my talk to you guys.
Wolf Creek if you like flats.
Wolf Creek is good. I like all mountains, but yes, there are some flat areas of all mountains. Anyway, so it looks like perhaps the south is favored. Well, here's what the National Weather Service says about the season. For December, January, and February, which is the meteorological winter, generally the coldest months of the year, they have us kind of around average temperatures. Warm to the west, cool to the southeast. However, precipitation, generally speaking, would be heavier in the southern mountains. So that would generally say, hey, northern mountains, I'm not too sure, maybe okay, maybe not. Southern mountains, maybe a little bit of an edge during most of the winter. However, that's December, January, and February. February, March, and April, the temperatures look about the same. And again, these are forecasts, right? There's nothing guaranteed 6 months out. But precipitation looks actually a little bit better. So if you just go by these seasonal forecasts, on average, the second half of the season might actually look better than the first half of the season. Again, I hate long-range forecasts, but this is the best that we can do. So again, second half might be a little bit better, and a little more consistent than the first half. All right, how far out can we forecast weather? Details of weather. Anybody? 24 hours. Oh, pain, hurt. Oh. Anybody else? Any other? It's okay. You're entitled to your opinion. Anybody else?
5 days.
5 days.
A month.
A month, I wish.
2 weeks.
If it were a month, I'd be a rich man. Yeah, 2 weeks might be pushing it. 5 to 10 days or so. So this is a map of a storm system. See that dip over Colorado? This was about a year ago. But that dip is a storm. Where those lines dip down, that's a storm. Now, the way we forecast longer range is we know that we're not going to get it exactly right, so we look at a bunch of different forecasts and try to average them out. Well, there's a bunch of different lines in there, and they all represent a different forecast. So now, 16 days before that, that's what actually happened. That's what actually happened. 16 days before that storm hit Colorado, here's what the forecasts look like. Okay, so that's what actually happened, and that's what the forecast was 16 days out. The red line is the average of all forecasts. Would you have forecasted a storm for Colorado 16 days out? Probably not. Would you even thought that there could be a storm in Colorado 16 days out?
The dashed line had it.
Well, so one out of, you're right, one out of about 30 options had it. Exactly right. But then 15 days out, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, still not. Right around 8 days, we started getting an inkling that something might happen. And then by around 5 days out, we had a pretty good idea of what it was going to be. Not the details, but we had a pretty good idea. And then around 3 days out, 2 days out, we really knew a lot of the details. So I'll summarize this right at the end, but 7 to 10 days is about the border of where we have any confidence in any sort of details. And then really 2 to 3 days out is when we know a lot and don't change the forecast. Usually much after that point, although we can change it. So what does that mean to the future? What's going to happen for the next 10 days? Well, I want to show you a map, and it's going to be animated, it's going to be a movie, of what's going to happen for the next 10 days. Here we go. So the blue areas are a storm. This is about a 10-day thing. You can see that storminess out in the Pacific Ocean, and boom, right there. If you blink, you missed it. So let me do that again. Here it goes. Storminess out in the Pacific Ocean, and then boom, next weekend, you get a little piece of that breaks off. We'll let it go one more time. So there it is. It's out in the Pacific Ocean, generally warmer and drier here. And then watch that from the Pacific Ocean come into Colorado, and boom, goes the dynamite? Yes, boom, boom, there it is. All right, so in 7 or 8 or 9 days, we could have a storm. Well, what does our 10-day forecast show? Anybody want to make sense of that for me? Nothing. So here's the challenge. When you look at the red line, it looks like there's a little dip there, so maybe we get a storm. But averages are deceiving, right? Because they just average out 30 different things, and usually the average is not exactly what happens. So you can see a lot of those lines dipping down further south of Colorado. That gives me a little bit of an inkling that that storm next weekend might actually miss us to the south. Now, here, see that dip? And I know for you in the back it might be a little hard. That dip over Colorado, this is next weekend. For those of you keeping score, I have completely skipped over this weekend and next week. And I'm sorry, but there's just not much happening. The good news is Tahoe is getting rain and snow. So they have not gotten anything really of interest for about 2 or 3 years. So just from a water standpoint, I mean, yes, it has rain and snow, but not very much. And there's a terrible drought, if you have not realized. So California getting rain and snow is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It does not help us, but it's really, really good. However, the next 7 days is really just not much happening. Maybe a little bit of snow Saturday night for our I-70 mountains, but not a whole lot. So next weekend is when things might get more interesting. So on average, the Canadian model, we're looking at 3 weather models here, says, yeah, there might be a little bit of a storm next Saturday, on average. Now, one version of the Canadian model has a storm going right over us. Hey, that's not bad. Well, let's look at a few more. This is the American GFS model. See that blue dip well south of Colorado? It says, hey, on average, that storm is going to miss us way to the south. Sorry, guys. But now look at not the average, but just one version of that. Hey, it's going to be a little closer. Well, look at the European model. Does anybody know, who's been following me, is the European model usually better or worse than these other weather models?
Better.
Better. Ah, good. So just so you realize, these models are, when I say European, Canadian, American, they don't just forecast our weather, or like the weather in Europe or Canada or the US. They forecast global weather. They're just made. They're created by these government centers that happen to be in the United States or in Canada or in Europe. Weather modeling is an incredibly expensive exercise with large supercomputers. It costs tens of millions of dollars a year. That's why it's generally done by large consortiums of nations, essentially, not individuals. So anyway, the Canadian model says, yeah, hey, we're going to storm next weekend. And one version of the Canadian model says, well, I might miss us a little to the south, but looking good. So you might say, all right, Canadian model says yes, everybody else says no, gung-ho, right? We've got it. Well, unfortunately, I love the Canadian or the European model. It's been terrible for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know what's happened. I think there was what was the movie with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd trading places? I feel like the American model and the European model just traded. I don't know what's going on. But here's one more way to look at next weekend. So here's the deal, just to summarize where we are. Not much going on this week, in the next 7 days. Next weekend looks maybe interesting. So we have 3 models, Canadian, American, and European. One of the 3 says it looks pretty good for next weekend. So maybe 30% chance of a decent storm. There's one more way to look at this, which is that European model. And this is, I mean, like, unless you're in the front row, you're never going to be able to see this, but I'm just going to tell you what this is. There are 25 images up on the screen. Each one represents a different version of the European model. It's run slightly differently. Now, if they all said the same thing, you get a lot of confidence that it's going to happen. If they all say different things, not much confidence that it's going to happen. So this is precipitation next Saturday from 25 versions of the European model, and I started the ones that actually look good for Colorado. So it's about 7 out of 25 look interesting for Colorado. There's actually 50 versions. So the next 25, still about 7 out of 25. So when you add that up, you get about 14 out of 50. Or for you math geniuses out there, that's around a 28 to 30% chance that we get a really meaningful, significant storm next weekend. So there's 2 ways to look at this. How many models are predicting a significant storm next weekend? Well, 1 out of 3, so maybe 30% chance. And then looking at that one model, about 30% of the versions of that model, I always talk with my hands and throw stuff around. About 30% of the versions of that model are also forecasting a significant storm. So what does that mean for next weekend? 10%. What that means is, God, I hope we get a lot of snow, but right now the odds are not in our favor. So to recap for the season, it looks like 1 in El Nino, 2, that favors southern Colorado. 3, it looks like the second half of the season looks better than the first, just looking at averages. And 4, for the next 10 or so days, really not a whole lot going on, with the next decent chance of snow coming about 8 days from now, next Friday, Saturday, Sunday-ish, but even that is kind of marginal at best. So, while I love my home state, I know you guys probably have vehicles and like to travel. So if you do, Northern Rockies actually are looking decent. Jackson Hole and Grand Targhee are pretty open at this point. They've had about 100 inches a year so far in the year, so that's pretty good. And then with another storm or two up into the Canadian Rockies actually looks interesting as well. So to be clear, I have no idea what the second half of January, what month are we in? December, thank you. Second glass of wine, that's the second glass of wine. I have no idea what the second half of December is going to hold. We might have an amazing holiday ski conditions with tons of snow, I'm not sure. But just to give you an overview, if that doesn't pan out and we don't get another big storm or two between now and then, and you're looking for really good snow, further north up into the Northern Rockies, up into Canada, Montana, and Wyoming might be interesting. And if it gets a little cooler, the Pacific Northwest too, over in Washington, could be good. They've had a lot of precipitation, but it's been a little warm, and their mountains are quite low. Generally 3, 4, 5, 6,000 feet, not as high as ours. So as the snow level creeps up, they don't do so well. If you grew up on the East Coast, you've skied in trash bags before, probably, maybe. Honestly, a few people. Yeah, you don't want to do that anymore out west. So that's what they're dealing with right now. To recap tonight, a couple of silent auction items in the back. I've talked as much about weather as I will force you to listen to.